Horse people know that purchasing the horse is the least expensive component of owning a horse.
My name is Merrill Dubrow, CEO of Mark Research. I'm a 35-year veteran of the research and insights community and the host of our podcast, On the Mark. On the Mark is focusing on executives and thought leaders in the world sharing their insights, strategies, and personal experiences. I promise this podcast will be filled with tough, pointed questions with real, insightful, and emotional answers. Today's guest is my good friend, fellow researcher, Nicole Symelidis, Vice President of Membership at the Insights Association. Nicole, welcome to the On the Mark podcast.
Thank you, Merrill. Thank you for having me.
So we're going to take a little turn, Nicole. I really appreciate you being on the podcast. And look, it's going to be a little bit different because, frankly, I don't really want to talk about your day job. I don't want to talk about the Insights Association and that you're the VP of membership and don't want to talk about how great the association is and how much I really believe in the association and how much benefit and content each of you is getting from the association, especially during this pandemic. I want to talk about something else. I want to thank you for all of that work, but I want to talk about your love for horses because I know nothing about horses, and the biggest animal I've ever had in my life was a 110-pound dog growing up, and I really just want to get into horses today. Is that okay?
That's great. And before we do, Merrill, I'm just going to say thank you for that intro. The association, and we appreciate your support of the association and everyone that's involved, all of our members, all of our constituents. And if you're not involved, I encourage you to reach out to me, join IA, support us. We're doing a ton of work, particularly during this insanity of a year. So we'd love to hear from you.
That's great, Nicole. And I can echo that. You guys are doing some great work with Melanie and Art and Jennifer and Jonathan Sachs and everybody on that team and all the content that you're delivering and really free membership for anybody in transition during the pandemic is something each of you should really be proud of. And I want to thank you on behalf of the entire industry. So I appreciate that. A subject like many, I know nothing about, Nicole, horses. How did you start to have that love for horses?
So I was about 10, and I think it's just wired into our DNA, some of us, especially little girls. You know, at some point in your preteen years, you fall in love with horses. I did. My grandmother on my mother's side had horses as a young girl. She grew up in the mountains of Sparta in Greece, and she had horses that she rode. They lived on a farm, a working farm, and they had horses. My mother rode for a bit. She was in junior high and high school, so I'd say it was, just kind of woke up one day and was obsessed and couldn't stop watching, Black Beauty and wanted to take riding lessons, and the rest is history.
That's great. I live in Texas, so the second I go out of my gate here, I see, believe it or not, alpacas, I see goats, I see chicken, I see cows, I see, are you ready for this? One of my neighbors about maybe a quarter of a mile away actually has 2 zebras in his front yard, which is hysterical. And then I see horses. And I always love seeing the horses, and I don't describe them with the right label. I'll look at a tan one and say, oh, there's a tan one. It's probably an Arabian horse, or I'll look at a black horse and I'll think it's it's probably a thoroughbred or something, right? So, is there an affinity that you have towards a certain type of horse?
I would say I have an affinity for thoroughbreds. I do enjoy, still watching a little bit of racing, not as much as I used to, but thoroughbreds are sort of the ultimate athlete of the equine world. And I'm probably a little bit biased. I have a thoroughbred. So I would say if, my go-to breed of horse would be a thoroughbred.
Oh, great. So you own a thoroughbred right now. What's his name? Her name?
Her name. She's a little girl. I have a 5-year-old mare is the term for a female horse, and her name is Copela, which means girl in Greek. And she is actually named after my grandmother's horse that she had back in the.
Wow, that's interesting. Copela, that's beautiful. So, how long have you owned Copela for?
I've had her about a year and a half now. I purchased her from a good friend of mine who dabbles in racehorses. He actually bred her, and she had one start at Belmont and failed miserably as a racehorse, as many of them do. So she is now going on to a career as a riding horse.
Wow. So when they fail miserably as a racehorse, does that mean she was more interested in the flowers, ended up last, didn't finish through the jockey? I mean, what does that mean?
Yeah, 30,000 plus thoroughbreds are bred a year with the intention of being successful at the racetrack, and only a very small percentage actually make any real money. And so, a lot of them are just too slow. A lot of them just don't have the will to run like that. They do run instinctively, but she's not a competitive type. She didn't like, all the hustle and bustle of the racetrack. It just wasn't for her.
That's great. What does she weigh, if I could ask?
She probably weighs about 1,100 pounds.
Wow, that's a big. And watch this. You ready for this? How many hands is she?
Wow,
How about that for a term? Well, the only reason is I Googled horse terms the other day, and it said something about hands. I'm like, I have no idea what that is, but I'm going to throw that out to Nicole. So what is a hand? And how many hands is she?
That's a great question. A hand is the unit of measurement that we use to measure a horse's height. And we measure them from their withers, which is the point where their neck meets their back, and then we measure down to the ground. So 1 hand equals 4 inches. So she is 16.1 hands.
16.1. Okay, so the winner of like the Belmont or maybe Kentucky Derby, is that like a 16-hand horse, or is that like an 18-hand horse? Like how big was that compared?
Thoroughbreds generally run between about 16 hands and maybe 17 and a half hands.
Okay, got it.
And there have been some little guys on the racetrack that do amazing things, and some big horses that win too.
Wow, that's great. So there you are, a year and a half ago. You purchased Copela, which again is Girl in Greece, which I love, and named after your grandma's horse, which is fantastic. That's a really cool story. How long before? I mean, I can't imagine Copela looks at you and says, "Oh, hi, Nicole. You're my new owner. I love you. Jump on my back." Like how long does it take? Seriously, like how long does it take before you can get on Copela and before she trusts you enough where it's like, okay, come on, let's go for a little jog?
Right. So it takes a while. Horses are really sensitive animals. And, one of the biggest parts of having a horse is that bond that you have with them and that trust. They're prey animals. So they're naturally sort of skittish, and spooky about things. And it took a little while. She came off the racetrack. She had some downtime. And then a good friend of mine, his name is Thomas. He is an amazing rider and trainer. I had him actually start her for me. I figured let's let a, professional, someone that rides 7-8 horses a day, get on her for the first time. And, just taking it really slowly and building up the trust and getting her physically in shape to do things. But it's definitely a process.
That's great. That's great. So, again, I've never owned a horse. I like looking at horses. The only thing with regard to a horse is I probably played basketball a few times, played horse. That's about it. In terms of like the monthly costs, I know that, and that may be, I know it's probably different for some, but you obviously have food and you probably have some type of rental or some type of barn fee and stuff like that. How much is it? If I said, hey, Nicole, I want to go buy a thoroughbred and I want to board it somewhere, how much is that a month?
Yeah, so it's basically like a second mortgage. I don't have children. If I did, that probably would, completely eliminate me from being able to afford a horse. But it is expensive. It depends on what area of the country you live in. I'm in New York, so of course everything here is super expensive. Depends on what type of facility you choose. There's lots of options, but it can run, anywhere from total cost probably $650 to $1,000 a month, depending on your situation. I, tell people, horse people know that purchasing the horse is the least expensive component of owning a horse.
Wow.
Those monthly fees never go away.
Wow, that's great. So I will admit that we have some neighbors here, and I go in their backyard. They have some donkeys and they have some horses, so I like to feed them carrots. And Blaze and Husker, I don't know. I'll have to figure it out, and maybe they'll stand there long enough so I can figure out how many hands they are. But they're big, and they're big, but their head is enormous. Like, and I've touched gently their nose. And even once in a while, their ears, if they let me, because they're really soft. But their nose, I mean, it's like permanent bone. And I've often wondered that if all of a sudden I'm looking at them and I look away and they turn and they whack me in with their head into my head or my face, I'm going to get a concussion, right? I mean, is that
Yeah,
happen?
no, that's not far-fetched. Horses are, they're big, heavy, powerful animals, and usually they have no intention of harming you, but they certainly can.
Yeah.
People, it's always a good rule of thumb not to stand directly in front of a horse because their eyes are set so wide on their head. So they have much better peripheral vision than they do, seeing directly what's in front of them. And if a
Mm-hmm.
fly is, annoying them and they flip their head upward, they can absolutely break your nose, crack your jaw. Again, not intentionally, but it's happened. So I always try to stand off to the side a little bit and, not directly in front of their face.
Yeah. No, I know. So obviously, I've got to ask you the question, which is, have you ever been on a horse where he or she has thrown you?
Oh, many times, many times. Yeah. If you're
Wow.
going to ride, you're going to fall. And that's,
Well, falls different than being thrown. I mean, being like chucked off a horse that's 5, 7 feet high, right? Did you have you broken bones?
I have the only broken bone I've ever had from a horse related accident is my tailbone. And it was funny. I didn't even fall. I put my leg over the horse. It was a horse I was riding many years ago as a kid. I jumped on him bareback and something came up from behind, scared him, and he kind of ran forward and threw out one little buck. And I just came down, probably right on the right spot on his back. And yeah, it was uncomfortable to sit for several weeks after that.
Wow. So you're lucky because you've been riding for, I don't know, 20, 30 years here and you've never really broken anything but your tailbone. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. Bunch of falls. I've been thrown a few times, bruises, ego bruises, but very lucky. I've never gotten seriously hurt.
We're all glad to hear that. So you've owned other horses, right? Besides Copela. How many other horses have you owned?
I've had one other horse. About 5 years into riding, my grandfather, he had promised me a horse. He was in real estate and he was, finalizing some deals and he promised me when everything was all set, he would buy me a horse. So I got my first horse whose name was Dapper when I was 16 and had him for 26 years.
Wow. And Dapper, I know I read an article recently, which we'll get to, but Dapper passed what, about, was it a year ago or a little less, 6 months ago?
Yeah, he actually just passed in March of this year, so a few months ago. Yep.
We've had a lot of dogs over the years. And I know when my parents finally decided they had to put the dog down, that was beyond an emotional decision, discussion, and end result, because frankly, it's without a question a family member. But, our dogs only lived to be 12. I mean, you had Dapper, how many years? 26, you said?
I had him for 26 years. He was
Jeez.
33 years old when he passed.
So, Dapper, I mean, when you first got Dapper, I mean, you were a young girl, right? You're in your teens or whatever. And I mean, Dapper really matured with you. You guys matured together, right? That must have been, can you walk us through how hard that decision was and how you got to that decision?
Sure. It was an excruciating decision for sure. Probably, we've all been through tough things in life, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this was right at the top of the list. I was 14 and he was 4 when we met, and I rode him off and on for a couple of years before he became mine. And he was a constant in my life and through so many formative years. And he was essentially still a baby when I got him, so he grew up and was kind of, horses are sort of always in training, as you go through their riding careers with them. And yeah, he was a huge part of my life and who I was as a person. And just for the many years that I had him, I've always been involved with horses. I've worked in different stables. I gave riding lessons for a while. I've done hardcore barn labor, mucking out stalls and that sort of stuff. And I was exposed to a lot of things, and I saw a lot of horses pass tragically. And I had my original riding trainer and a mentor of mine and a great friend. Her name is Diane. One of the things she taught me early in my riding career was that, specific to horses, because they're so big and they often die tragically, and that, it's always good to think about planning that last day and making it a peaceful one to waiting for something bad to happen. So that always stayed with me.
Yeah, that's sad. Thanks for sharing that story. So I know recently you wrote an article in the Chronicle of a Horse. I think it was Death with Dignity, Why I Choose to Put My Horse Down on a Good Day. Can you talk a little bit about the motivation of why you decided to do that? Because that had to be, writing that had to be really difficult for you.
Sure. Yeah, it was difficult. Grief for me, and I think for a lot of people, comes in waves. And I was a little bit numb for the first, I'd say, month or so. And then I started having, usually at night, I would just have really strong emotions, and I was missing my horse. And a couple months ago, I just couldn't sleep. It was probably 11 o'clock at night. And I just had all of it in my head and sat down and wrote it. I do really enjoy writing, and kind of just helped me. It was cathartic for me to just put it all down on paper, and thought I'd take a shot and see if, kind of a topic that no matter what equestrian discipline you're a part of, a lot of people can relate to. And the Chronicle of the Horse, I'm grateful they picked it up and gotten a great response. A lot of really amazing stories and comments back from people, and telling me that it helped them and helped, to make them feel a little bit better about their own decisions that they've either already made or are going to make. So it was a great way to honor my horse, and I'm just overwhelmed by how many people it touched.
That's great. Did you, on the last day, I know on one of our last dogs, she loved ice cream, and we gave her a bowl of ice cream. Did Dapper have like a favorite snack or a favorite food or something that you made sure that Dapper got on the last day?
Yeah, he did. All horses obviously love your standard carrots, apples, sugar cubes, that sort of thing. He, unfortunately, one of his ailments that played into my decision was he had a dental condition that a lot of old horses suffer from that was making it really hard for him to eat pretty much anything. So his days of biting into, or even taking a small piece of a carrot or an apple were pretty much behind him. But one of his favorite things was to be curried, which is part of the grooming process of horses. And it's sort of a rubber, hard-toothed, brush that we use on them to sort of, stimulate their skin and get the dust off of them. And he absolutely loved it. So my plan was just, I wanted his last day to be a normal day. I didn't want it to be, horses are creatures of habit. They love their routine, especially older horses. And so he got a nice currying before the vet arrived, and that was probably one of his favorite things. And I was, happy to do that for him before he passed.
Wow. Yeah, that's it's amazing. So I'm sure there'll be some listeners who have thought about owning a horse and how cool it would be. Any advice for anybody out there who's going to be listening, Nicole, who's thinking about this? Just give them some thoughts to consider before making that decision.
Sure. Yeah, I would say the biggest consideration is the commitment. Horses generally live a long time. Dapper was 33. It's funny, with similar to people, horses are living longer than they did 20 years ago. And that's thanks to, advances in medicine and quality of feed and, all kinds of treatments that we have available for them today. And certainly, people sell horses all the time. That's not unusual, but you want to make sure you know where they're going. A lot of horses end up in terrible situations that people never intended them to end up in. So I would say commitment is the biggest factor to consider. Depending on how old the horse is when you get it, you're probably going to have it a long time. And with that commitment, of course, is the financial commitment. And they need your time. People are busy, and most people don't have the luxury of keeping them on their own property. So you've got to travel to wherever you board your horse to visit them, to ride them, to make sure that they're getting what they need. So I would say consider that carefully before you venture into purchasing. There's other options. You can take riding lessons. You can lease a horse, so you don't have that full commitment. You can lease for a couple days a week and get fixed without being, fully committed as an owner. But if you're going to take that leap, think about it and think about, be realistic about your level as a rider.
Yeah, that's great. Listen, I need a favor from you.
Sure.
Well, are you saying yes?
Yes.
Nice. So within the next hour, can you do me a favor? Can you please change your LinkedIn profile picture? I know the one you're using is the standard LinkedIn picture that they give you. It's the default one. Why don't you change it to a picture of you and Dapper?
I will do that. That's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would really be nice. And I think that would mean a lot to you and to your family. And I know that when people check out your profile online, it'll be a nice conversation starter. And I know that all the listeners would really enjoy seeing a picture of Dapper as well. And we'll make sure that we include a picture of you when we have the podcast and release the podcast. We'll put the picture of you and Dapper on the release as well. So
that's great. Thank you.
I can't thank you enough for your time today. Thanks again for listening to On the Mark podcast. My name is Merrill Dubrow. Have a great day.